The next person you're about to hear from is a member of this community, sings in front of you every single Sunday, and in addition to being able to lift a voice through the gift of song, also commits a voice for those who are most marginal among us and commits pen to paper. Author, advocate, psychotherapist, our own Dave Fredrickson has dedicated his professional life to the underserved communities. Serves on the board of the directors for the HIV Story Project, which is a non-for-profit that's focused on bringing and bridging HIV/AIDS film and media with storytelling, and also works to lead LGBT community groups with the University of California, San Francisco. Put it together for David Fredrickson. Come on up. Oh, yeah.
Good morning. Red ribbon. Red ribbon, red ribbon, the color of freshly drawn blood, stigma looking for a name, scarlet letters, AIDS. Red ribbon, terror, hatred, and so many dead. God's vengeance for perversion, theology of God's love denied. Red ribbon, the rebellion of the oppressed, silence, shame in the shadows transformed into a red code of solidarity and hope. Red ribbon, now 3 decades long. Pharmaceutical answers, public health proclamations, yet the conversation is eerily silent. Red ribbon, faded with time and more expendables, the color of black and brown, impoverished nations and voices that don't matter. Red ribbon, infected and affected survivors hushed, denial, exhaustion, and the trauma of remembering. Yet the sidewalks vibrate with a chant. Red ribbon, the cacophonous chorus grows louder. Silence equals death. Make noise, make music. Hear with your ears, but listen with your hearts. 2 weeks ago, I was in Wisconsin visiting my 89 and 90-year-old parents. That's right. Although my dad has long been retired from the ministry, he was and always will be an evangelical preacher. On one of the last days of my visits, my dad told my siblings and me that he wanted to have a talk, always an ominous sign. He told us that he's been thinking a lot about heaven these days, and then, of course, also hell. He wanted to remind us and encourage us to tell those we love that there are only 2 choices: heaven and hell. Ironic when you say that 2 weeks after my visit on this commemoration of World AIDS Day, here I stand in a church with a microphone. And I'd like to offer a reframe. Dear Dad, we always do have a choice. The choice is between love and fear. The choice is between healing through our connection with ourselves, others, and with God, or suffering within the isolated hells that others have put us in and which we remain complicit. Telling our stories is an act of courage. But this courage is not the absence of fear. It's the willingness to stand in the midst of it. Almost 30 years ago, I confidently strolled to the Castro Health Center. I had taken the slow boat out of the closet, and so I was sure that I was negative. I had told no one I was getting tested. Many of my friends and most of my family didn't know that I was gay. I can't remember what the nurse said, but I remember the sad look in her eyes as she shook her head. As it turned out, I was infected in one of my first sexual experiences. Yet it didn't really matter who or why. Like so many before me, I was probably going to die. As an evangelical preacher's son, the God I understood only saw two outcomes to homosexuality: condemnation and alienation in this life, and hell in the next. I considered my infection an answer to a prayer that I often prayed as a celibate teenager and young man. Dear God, if in your providence you know that I'm going to act out on my sexuality, please take my life. For years, I didn't tell anyone. I was a young therapist at that time, working with severely traumatized children and families, and in between sessions, I would curl up on the floor in a fetal position, alone and scared. The irony was not lost on me. My office was a space for telling one's story and being heard, and yet I was unable and unwilling. Yet, by the grace of God, almost 30 years later, here I stand. Thank you. But I am healed. I have come to believe in a God that is not involved in the micromanaging of a virus, or any illness for that matter. Who gets it and why? Who dies, how, and when? But he is in the business of bearing witness to our stories, our journeys as we heal ourselves in the midst of adversity and pain. Over the last 3 decades, my healing journey has been one of finding my voice and finding those who are willing to listen. On this Sunday after World AIDS Day, I appreciate this opportunity to speak in a church because churches have had a profound relationship with this disease. Glide is at one end of the continuum, supporting and loving us when few spiritual communities would. And on the other extreme, a Baptist pastor in Tempe, Arizona, Stephen Anderson, gave a sermon on November 30th and posted it online on Monday, proclaiming that he had found the cure to AIDS and that it was in the Bible. He said, if you execute the homos like God commands, you won't have all of this AIDS. And then somewhere in the middle of the spiritual continuum are many compassionate spiritual or faith communities. And they have advocated to hate the sin but love the sinner. I just want to know, how is that possible? My so-called sin is who I am. So I guess I am unlovable. Yet they say I am loved, or is it hated? In a mental health context, this is called a double bind. A double bind is an emotionally distressing dilemma in which an individual or group receives two or more conflicting messages, and one message negates the other. The double bind occurs when the person cannot confront the inherent dilemma and therefore can neither resolve it nor opt out. I consider this gay double bind to be spiritual abuse. As often is the case with abuse, the only way to opt out is self-destructive and reckless behavior, isolation, dissociation, addictions, abusive relationships, and even suicide. HIV/AIDS flourishes in this context, not because the virus has a moral compass, but because broken spirits that feel they are inherently unlovable live in closets and make unhealthy, conscious and unconscious decisions to numb their pain. I believe God's work of healing requires a witness bearer. What does one look like? I'd like to introduce you to my Rufus. Rufus inspired the narrator voice in my novel, Life on All Fours, and sadly died in June at the age of 12, ironically, just as the book was completed. Rufus was one of God's beautiful spirits who taught me about bearing witness. Look at him. It's in his upward prone position, the willingness to suspend his agenda with the urgency of understanding. It's in his eyes, quiet but intense, waiting for me. And I could feel it in his exuberant love that had no limits and no conditions. When we are held with that kind of love, we show up. And when we show up, miracles happen. Amen. Carl Rogers, one of the founders of humanistic psychology, said, and I quote, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." This kind of self-acceptance is nurtured, supported, and dreamed into being when someone bears witness to our stories. Tell your stories so you don't become a victim to your past. Become the light you were meant to be, and bear witness to the stories of others so that you might be agents of love and healing. Thank you.